At 71, Greg Norman is no longer talking about trophies. He is talking about 5 men he could never solve. This is not a list of the greatest golfers of all time. This is something far more personal. From the quiet control of Jack Nicklaus, to the chaos of Seve Ballesteros, to the dominance of Tiger Woods, these were not just rivals. They changed how the game felt. They changed how he saw himself. And once that happens, you never play the same way again. Have you ever walked onto the first tee and felt something was already decided? Have you ever looked across at another man and known this was not going to unfold your way, no matter how well you played? And what does it mean when a man who built his career on control finally admits there were moments he had none? By the time Greg Norman reached 71, the game no longer lived in the trophies. It lived in the memories that refused to leave. There was one moment he rarely spoke about. Not a final round, not a collapse the world remembers, just a quiet day. The kind where everything feels right. The swing is there, the rhythm is there, the course feels open in front of you. And yet, something does not move. Across from him stood a player who did not rush, did not force anything, did not react to the moment the way everyone else did. And slowly, without warning, the feeling changed. Not on the scorecard, but inside. For the first time, Norman realized something he could not explain. There are players who do not beat you with shots. They take away your timing. They take away your decisions. They take away your belief, one hole at a time. And the hardest part is that you do not see it happening until it is already gone. That moment stayed with him longer than any victory ever did. Because it was not about losing, it was about understanding. There were levels to this game he could feel, but never fully control. And over the years, 5 names kept returning. Not because of what they won, but because of what they changed in him. Tonight, he finally speaks about the 5 men who made him feel powerless. There was a time when the game seemed to bend around him, before the doubts, before the moments he could not explain. Greg Norman was not just another name on the leaderboard, he was the presence other players measured themselves against. You could feel it before a round even began. On the practice range, in the quiet exchanges between players, in the way conversations shifted when he walked past. There was an understanding unspoken but clear. If he found his rhythm, the rest of the field would be chasing it. He played the game the way few dared to, not cautiously, not patiently in the traditional sense. He attacked. He trusted instinct over hesitation, momentum over calculation. There were rounds where it felt like he was not managing the course, but forcing it to respond to him. And when it worked, it did not just look good. It looked inevitable. Winds came across continents, different conditions, different pressures, different expectations, and yet the style remained the same, direct, confident, unapologetically aggressive. At his peak, he did not just win tournaments. He carried an identity into every round. The kind of identity that makes other players uncomfortable. Because when someone plays like that, it changes the decisions around them. It forces risks where there should be patience. It creates pressure before the first mistake is even made. For years, he lived inside that space. World number 1, a name that did not need explanation. But even then, there were moments that did not fit the image. Rounds where the swing was still there, the confidence still visible, and yet something underneath did not hold. At the time, it was easy to explain it away. A bad bounce, a missed red, a decision made too quickly. Golf gives you those excuses. But over time, the pattern became harder to ignore, because the same names kept appearing, not always beating him in obvious ways, not always dominating the scoreboard, but leaving something behind. A hesitation that was not there before, a second thought where instinct used to be enough. That was the part he did not talk about. Not during his prime, not when the game still felt like something he could impose himself on. Because admitting it would mean accepting something far more difficult than losing. It would mean accepting that there were players who could take control of a match without ever looking like they were trying to. And once you feel that, even once, you never approach the game the same way again. Those were the men who stayed with him, not because of what they won, but because of what they quietly changed. And to understand why their names still matter, you have to start with the one who redefined control itself. Number 5. Jack Nicklaus. When Norman first began crossing paths with Jack, it never felt like a rivalry in the way people imagine. There was no tension in the air, no visible edge, no sense that anything needed to be proven. If anything, it felt settled. Jack did not arrive with noise. He did not impose himself through emotion or momentum. He simply occupied the space, quietly, completely, in a way that made everything around him feel already decided. That was the first thing that unsettled Norman. Because he played the game differently. He thrived on rhythm, on building pressure, on forcing the round to shift in his direction through instinct and intent. He wanted to take control early and make others react. Jack never reacted, and that was the problem. There were rounds where Norman felt sharp. The swing was there, the reads were clean, the decisions came naturally. The kind of rounds where you expect something to separate you from the field. But standing on the tee with Jack, that expectation began to fade. Not because Jack was doing anything extraordinary, but because he was removing everything unnecessary. While others were thinking about how to create chances, Jack was thinking about how to eliminate mistakes. While others chased moments, he allowed them to come to him. There was no urgency in his movement, no visible shift when the pressure increased. And over 4 days that difference became impossible to ignore. You would look up and realize something had changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just steadily. A shot here, a safe decision there, a moment where nothing seemed to happen, and yet the margin tightened. Norman could match the shots. He knew that. He could see the lines, feel the swings execute when it mattered. But what he could not match was the way Jack saw the game. It was not about playing better. It was about playing differently. And the more Norman tried to push, the more he moved away from his own game and closer to something that did not belong to him. That was the trap. There is a moment he carried with him long after the round ended. Not a final, not a collapse, just a quiet realization standing over a shot that should have felt routine. For the first time he hesitated, not because he did not know what to do, but because he began to think about what Jack would do. That hesitation was small, almost invisible, but it changed everything. Because once you stop playing your game, you are no longer in control of the round. And Jack never gave that control back. That was what made him so difficult. It was not his power. It was not even his putting. It was his ability to take the game out of your hands without you realizing when it happened. Norman would go on to win, to lead, to dominate stretches of his career in ways few ever could, but he never felt like he solved Jack. Not completely. And that is something he rarely admitted, because against most players you can point to a mistake, a moment, a decision that cost you. Against Jack, it never felt that simple. It felt like you were trying to break something that did not bend. And in the end, that is what stayed with him. The understanding that control, real control, does not need to be forced. It only needs to be held. Number 4. Seve Ballesteros. If Jack made the game feel controlled, Seve made it feel unstable. There was no pattern you could rely on, no rhythm you could read, no structure you could prepare for, and that was the first problem. Norman was used to understanding players, studying tendencies, anticipating decisions before they were made. Golf at that level is not just about execution, it is about prediction. But Seve gave you nothing to predict. The first time Norman spent enough time around him to truly see it, something felt off. Not in a way that looked dangerous, in a way that felt unpredictable. You could hit the fairway, set yourself up perfectly, play the hole exactly as it was designed, and still walk off behind. Because somewhere from a position that should not matter, Seve created something. It did not follow logic, it did not follow percentage. It followed instinct, and that changes everything. There were moments, especially in team environments like the Ryder Cup, where the atmosphere carried more weight than the course itself. Noise, emotion, momentum. Most players tried to manage that, to stay neutral, to avoid being pulled into it. Seve leaned into it. He used it. Norman watched it happen more than once. A hole that looked finished, a situation that demanded caution, and instead, Seve chose something else. A shot from deep rough, an angle no one else would consider, a decision that on paper made no sense. And somehow, it worked. Not every time, but often enough to make you question everything. That was the damage. Because once you begin to question your own decisions, you are no longer playing freely. You are thinking, adjusting, second-guessing. Norman built his game on pressure, on forcing the moment, on taking risks when others held back. But Seve showed him something uncomfortable. There were levels to creativity he had never reached. You could do everything right and still feel like you were chasing something you did not understand. There is a moment that stayed with him. Not a famous one, not something replayed on television, just a hole where everything was clear. Norman in position, control in hand. Seve in trouble, real trouble. And by the time they reached the green, it had flipped. No explanation, no obvious turning point, just a shift. That is when it settles in. You are not just playing the course anymore. You are playing someone who sees possibilities where you only see limits. And there is no easy adjustment for that. You cannot practice it. You cannot prepare for it, because it is not technical. It is instinct, at a level that makes your own feel incomplete. Norman did not lose control in those moments the way people imagine. He did something worse. He started to doubt the way he understood the game itself. And once that doubt enters, it does not leave easily. Seve did not take control the way Jack did. He did not remove mistakes. He created chaos. And inside that chaos, he was always the one who understood it better. That is what made him so difficult. That is what made him stay. Number 3. Tiger Woods. By the time Tiger arrived, Norman was no longer chasing relevance. He had already built it. Wins across continents. Time at the top of the world rankings. A presence that carried weight before a round even began. He understood pressure. Or at least, he believed he did. Then Tiger stepped into the game. And something shifted. It was not immediate in the way people remember. Not just the victories, not just the records. It was the feeling. You could sense it before a single shot was played. On the range, walking to the first tee. In the way, conversations quieted without anyone asking them to. There was a change in the air. Norman noticed it the first time without fully understanding it. A subtle tension, a different kind of awareness. Not fear, something heavier. Because Tiger did not just bring talent, he brought certainty. And that certainty spread. There were tournaments where Norman felt ready, sharp, in control. The kind of mindset that had carried him through years of dominance. But with Tiger in the field, that control felt different. Not gone, just challenged in a way that did not come from the course. There is a moment that stayed with him. Augusta, late 90s. You did not need to be in the same group to feel what was happening. The leaderboard told part of the story, but not the real one. The real story was how effortless it looked. How the course, a place that demands respect, seemed to open for him. While others managed it, Tiger overwhelmed it. And that creates a different kind of pressure, because you begin to change. Not consciously, not at first, just small adjustments. A swing a little harder, a line a little more aggressive, a decision you would not normally make, not because you want to, because you feel like you have to. That is where it starts. Tiger did not need to force anything onto you. He altered your rhythm without ever touching it. Your timing shifts, your patience shortens, your confidence becomes conditional. And the most difficult part, he never looked like he was carrying the same weight. The bigger the moment, the calmer he seemed. While others reacted, he dictated. That was new. Norman had seen control with Jack. He had seen creativity with Seve. But this was something else. This was dominance that removed doubt. There were moments where it did not feel like a contest. Not because Norman lacked the ability. He knew what he could do. He had proven it over years. But because the gap was something you could feel before the round even began. And once you feel that, you cannot ignore it. It changes the way you approach every shot, every decision, every moment that matters. You stop playing freely. You start measuring yourself against something that does not seem to bend. That was the weight Tiger carried into every tournament. Not just expectation, inevitability. And for Norman, that was the first time the game felt out of reach in a way he could not explain. Not because he was beaten, but because he was made to feel like he was already behind. Number 2. Faldo. This one was different. There was no aura that overwhelmed you before the round. No unpredictability that forced you into doubt. No sense that anything unusual was about to happen. If anything, it felt controlled, structured, almost predictable. And that is exactly where Norman misread it. When they first began competing regularly, he did not see danger the way he did with others. He saw discipline, consistency, a system that could be pressured. He believed he could break it. Because Norman thrived on momentum, on creating movement in a round, on pushing the pace until something shifted. But Faldo did not move. That was the difference. There were rounds where Norman played the way he always had, aggressive, instinctive, confident in the decisions that had carried him to the top of the game. And Faldo remained the same, shot after shot, hole after hole, no reaction, no urgency, no deviation. You could not speed him up. You could not force a mistake through pressure. He stayed exactly where he wanted to be. And that creates a very specific kind of tension. Not the kind that hits you all at once. The kind that builds slowly, quietly. There is a moment Norman has never fully left behind. Augusta, mid-90s. He entered the final round with control, a lead that should have been enough, more than enough. Early on, everything still felt intact. The same rhythm, the same belief. But Faldo did not chase. He did not respond to the scoreboard. He did not force the moment. He stayed within himself. And slowly, the gap began to close. Not because of brilliance, not because of something dramatic, because nothing went wrong. That is what made it difficult. There was no moment to point to, no single shot to explain the shift. Just accumulation. A missed opportunity here, a slight hesitation there, a growing awareness that the round was no longer unfolding the same way. Norman could feel it, not just on the board. Inside, the freedom began to tighten, the decisions became heavier. Every swing carried more weight than the last, and Faldo remained unchanged. That is the part people do not always understand. It was not that Faldo took the tournament away. It was that he never gave Norman a moment to release the pressure. No opening, no mistake to reset the rhythm. Just presence. Constant. Unmoving. By the time the back nine arrived, the feeling had shifted completely. It no longer felt like Norman was leading. It felt like he was holding on, and Faldo was waiting. That day did not stay with him because of the result. It stayed because of what it revealed. That control, real control, does not always look dominant. It does not need to. It only needs to remain. Faldo did not overwhelm him. He did not outplay him in the way people expect. He outlasted him. And in doing so, he showed Norman something far more difficult to accept, that sometimes the game is not taken from you in a moment. It is taken, slowly, until you realize you no longer have it. Number 1. Arnold Palmer. By the time Norman truly understood Arnold, it was already too late to experience him the way others had. He did not face him at his peak. He did not stand across from him in the kind of direct battles that define rivalries. And yet, that did not make him any less present. If anything, it made him harder to define, because Arnold was not just a player by then, he was something else. The first time Norman felt it clearly, it was not on a leaderboard, it was not during a critical round. It was walking onto a course, and realizing the atmosphere had already changed. The galleries were different. The movement of the crowd was different. The energy did not follow the tournament. It followed him. Every step, every glance, every swing, there was a weight to it. Not pressure in the way competitors understand it. Something broader, something that extended beyond the shot being played. Norman had built his game on presence, on imposing himself onto a round, on shifting momentum through action. But this was not something you could impose. This was something that existed, whether you were ready for it or not. There were moments when Norman would hit a good shot, a controlled approach, a confident strike, and it felt normal. Then Arnold would step in, and the same kind of shot felt different. Not technically better, not more precise, but heavier. The crowd carried it. The moment expanded around it, and suddenly the round no longer felt like a sequence of shots. It felt like a story being shaped around one man. That is something you cannot prepare for, because it does not come from mechanics, it does not come from strategy. It comes from presence, and presence is not something you can take, only something you can have. Norman began to understand that over time, that greatness is not always contained between the tee and the green. Sometimes it exists in everything around it, in the way people respond, in the way a moment changes when someone is there. in the way the game itself feels larger. Arnold had that. He did not need to control the round the way Jack did. He did not need to create the unexpected like Seve. He did not need to dominate like Tiger. He did not need to outlast like Faldo. He transformed the environment. And when you are inside that environment, trying to compete, you are no longer just playing the course. You are playing something you cannot influence. That was the realization. Not immediate, not obvious, but lasting. Because once you understand that kind of presence, you begin to see the game differently, not just as a contest of skill, but as something shaped by forces you cannot always control. And for Norman, that was one of the hardest things to accept. Years passed, the noise faded, the crowds thinned, the conversations about wins and losses slowly lost their urgency. What remained were not the trophies. What remained were the names. For Greg Norman, those 5 names never settled into history the way people expect. They did not become distant. They did not soften with time. If anything, they became clearer, not because of what those men won, but because of what they left behind. Each one had taken something different from him. Jack Nicklaus showed him a version of control he could never fully reach, a way of playing that did not chase the game, but quietly contained it. Seve Ballesteros forced him to confront the limits of logic, to accept that imagination could undo even the most perfect plan. Tiger Woods changed the scale entirely, made the game feel different before it even began. Faldo revealed how pressure does not always arrive in moments. Sometimes it builds until there is nothing left to hold on to. And Arnold Palmer showed him that the game was never just about the shots. It was about everything around them. For a long time, Norman believed greatness could be measured. Wins, rankings, moments that could be pointed to and explained. That belief does not disappear easily. But it changes. Because when you have stood across from men like that, you begin to understand something quieter. Greatness is not what you hold at the end of a tournament. It is what stays with you long after it is over. It is the hesitation that appears where certainty once lived. The questions that return when the round is done. The feeling that in certain moments you were not fully in control, even when it looked like you were. Norman had his chances. Moments where things could have unfolded differently. Decisions that could have been made another way. Paths that might have led somewhere else. He knows that. But time changes the way you see those moments. Because those men did not just take from him, they shaped him. Every strength he trusted, every weakness he had to face, it came through standing across from them. And in the end, that is what remained. Not the wins people remember, but the names that never left. Because the truth is, you do not measure greatness when you are holding a trophy. You measure it years later, when you realize who is still standing in your mind every time you step over a shot that matters. And for him, it was always the same 5.